This Torah class is brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.
Okay, good morning everyone. So it's Erev Tisha B'Av, and we want to try to learn some items that will give us a deeper feel and understanding for the loss of the Beis Hamikdash. So I want to learn today from the Sefer Ze'ev Yitroif of Reb Zev Huberman, and the first inyan I want to focus on is the inyan that the Gemara teaches us in Gemara Rosh Hashanah, Daf Yud Ches Amud Beis, Shkula misasan shel tzadikim kisrei fas Beis Elokeinu. The death of the righteous is the equivalent of the burning of the Beis Hamikdash, which is one of the reasons why we read about the Asara Harugei Malchus on Tisha B'Av. Even though it didn't happen on Tisha B'Av, nevertheless, the death of tzaddikim is the equivalency of the destruction of the temple. The pasuk says in Zechariah, Kaya Amar Hashem Tzavakos, Tzayim Haravi, V'tzayim HaChamishi, V'tzayim HaShvi, V'tzayim HaAsiri, Yiyah LeBeis Yehuda, L'sasayin U'Lesimcha U'Lamayadim Tovim. That God will transform all the fast days into days of happiness and joy. And the Gemara in Abraisa in Rosh Hashanah, Yud Ches Amud Beis, identifies that the Tzayim HaChamishi is the fast of the 5th month, namely Tisha B'Av. Zet Tisha B'Av Shabbai Nisaf Beis Elokeinu. Why is it called the 5th? It's the 5th month. The 7th is Tzayim Gedaliah, Gimel Tishrei, where Gedaliah ben Achikam was killed. And who killed him? Yishmael ben Nesanya killed him. To teach that the death of the tzaddikim is the equivalency of the burning of the Beis Hamikdash. And why is it called the 7th? It's the 7th of the month. V'tzarech biur shikol zeh. This equivalency requires understanding. Sheshkula misas tzadikim kasreifas elekeinu dema inyan zu lazu at sheshkulanhein. What is their nature that we're saying that they're equal? How is the death of a tzaddik equal to the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash? So says Rav Huberman, V'nira l'fi hamavur b'sefer Netzach Yisrael, Perek Dalet. Let's explain it based on the Netzach Yisrael, and this is a Maharal that we've spoken out in the past. And he says, K'may shenasan haneshama el ha'adam shu nitzutz kvoida yisbarach. The same way that God places a soul in man, which is the spark of God. The soul is a piece of the divine. Kach his riach Hashem yisbarach b'mikdash es kvoidoi v'oiroi. Likewise, God illuminates in the mikdash His glory. What the neshama is to the guf, the shechina is to the mikdash. Ulefikach heichal hakodesh hu mekudash el Hashem. Therefore, the temple, which is sanctified for God, mizdam legamri el heichal adam, is really very comparable to man. Man as the seat of God's presence, asher sham kavod neshama. The soul of man in the body, which is the spirit of God in man, is very similar to the spirit of God in the temple. V'davar zeh ramzu chachamim gamkein. This concept, says Maharal, is alluded to b'masha amru, in that which Chazal tell us in the Gemara, kol adam sheyesh by das. Anyone who has das, I remember hearing from Rav Avigdor Miller, what is das? Everybody knows that there is an olam haba, but for many, the intellectual knowledge and the feel of its reality is disconnected. Everybody knows there's a God who watches our actions, but for most people, the knowledge and the feel of the reality is disconnected, because for most people it's just information. It's not das. Das is, everybody knows not to put their finger in a fire because they're going to burn it. That's not just an intellectual piece of knowledge. That is so imbued in your reality that because you know the repercussions, you feel the repercussions, you're acutely aware. But we don't have das when it comes to knowledge of Hashem. There seems to be a disconnect. But when someone has das, when someone lives with the reality of God, when someone lives with the reality of Olam Haba, Ki'ilu nivna Beis Hamikdash b'yamav, it's like the temple was built in his times. V'zen isbar b'makam acher ba'arichos, says Maharal. This is explained elsewhere at length. V'oid kasav sham ba'isei perek. The Maharal writes over there, Klal hadavar ki elu shnei dvarim shkulim hamikdash v'ha'adam. These two items are equal. The Beis Hamikdash and man. Ki beheichal Hashem yizbarach, kvoid Hashem zarach alav. In God's heichal, the glory of God shines. V'kach beheichal adam, likewise in the heichal of man. Shoichein kvoid haneshama. There resides the glory of the soul. V'yeshivasa beheichala doimel kvoid Hashem. And the station of the soul in the body is similar to God's presence in His temple. K'de'isa b'parakama debrachos. Hani hey barchi nafshi keneged mi amron. We just learned that Gemara in Brachos. The 5 barchi nafshis that David said, what does it correspond to? Lo amar David ela keneged HaKadosh Baruch Hu keneged HaNeshama. David said it keneged God and the soul, and David was comparing this, the way the soul fills the body, to God, how He fills the world. When all of man's faculties and abilities are dedicated to holiness, and without man contaminating them, God then likewise resides in His abode. And when man is tameh, az nitma mizeh gam kein heichal Hashem. God's heichal is also tameh. So the Maharal says that man is the equivalency of the temple. Marv Rabbi, I would like to suggest, how many kinus are there on Tisha B'Av? 45. Begematria Adam. That signifies that when you see the temple destroyed, recognize what is really destroyed. It is we who are in a state of desolation. Nothing is right with us. And if we cannot be a temple for Hashem's presence, then there's no Beis Hamikdash. Says Rav Huberman, Hine divrei Rabbeinu bar mileilam. The words of the Maharal are so clear. Ki ha'adam atzmei Beis Hamikdashu, ki beheichal Hashem yizbarach. In the abode of God, kvoid Hashem zarach alav, v'chein beheichal ha'adam, is the neshama. This also, the Maharal says, Chazal teach us, when they say anyone who has das, it's like the Beis Hamikdash was built in his time. Zoi soy meres, a person. This proves that someone who has das, which again we explained as a knowledge of the foundations of Judaism in a way where it's not just intellectual, but it changes your behavior. Hareu k'Beis Hamikdash. Someone like that is like the temple. Amnam im ein by das. Someone who does not have this reality of knowledge, lo have a Beis Hamikdash, is not like a temple. And Rav Hoberman elaborates further, the residing of the soul and the mind, like the spirit rests in the heart, and like the life force rests in the liver. The fact that the soul resides in the mind and the brain, we see from here, that the light does not shine in the abode of man, but rather in his das and his seichel. That's therefore someone who has no das. In other words, what does it mean that the neshama rests in the brain? It doesn't rest in your physicality. It rests in your das. So if you don't have das, there's no neshama. If there's no soul, then you can't be a Beis Hamikdash. Uminayin de Beis Hamikdashu. Minayin loy ar neshama behichaloi. This is how the Maharal explains. Beheichal ha'adam. Shoichin kvoid ha'neshama v'shivas bechal adam kvoid Hashem. Therefore it's obvious. Adam shein by das v'seichel. For the neshama to reside there, he cannot be a Beis Hamikdash. You can't say about him that the same way God resides in him, God similarly resides in the temple, because God is not residing in him. You can't say beheichal ha'adam shoichin kvoid ha'neshama v'yeshivasa behechala doimel kvoid Hashem. So what do we see from here? That someone who has das is like a Beis Hamikdash. After it has been clarified that someone who has das, he himself is a Beis Hamikdash, because in the heichal of Adam resides the covet of the neshama. Heitev muvan hachta tani bebraisa. Now we understand so perfectly that which the Brisa in Rosh Hashanah says: the death of the righteous is like the burning of the Beis Hamikdash. Shkula misasan shel tzadikim kisreifas Beis Elokeinu. The tzadikim vada yesh bahem das. Tzadikim, there's no question they have das. What's das? Das is again knowing the tenets of Yiddishkeit, where it's not just intellectual information, but it's in your emotions. But tzadikim who have das, they're doimet to Beis Hamikdash. Klal adavar, says the Maharal. Elu shnei dvarim shkulam hamikdash v'adam. Man and the temple are equal. Ki beheichal Hashem kvoid Hashem zarach. In the temple, God's light shone. V'kach beheichal adam shoichin kvoid haneshama. Umisham hachi misas hatzadik esrevas Beis Elokeinu. If man is a temple, so the death of the righteous is like the burning of the temple. With the death of the righteous, his soul is elevated to the highest places, K'vayid HaNeshama, and it no longer resides in its body, in its Heichal Dama L'Kvad Hashem. Now we could understand what the Gemara says in Masechta Shabbos in Ba'ameh Madlikin, because of the sin of murder, the temple was destroyed and the Shechina was departed from Israel. Shenemar v'lo sachanifu. Don't commit murder. Don't flatter the land. Don't contaminate the land that you're resting on. Asher ani shoichem esoicha ha'atem metamim oisa. But if you do contaminate, ein chem yoshim ba va'eini shoichem esoicha, you will not live there and I will not live there. Ba'avoin gilei arayis ha'avodas gam v'hashmat hashmitim v'yoyv lo izgolos ba la'olam u'ban achirim v'yoshim v'mekayman. So here's the question. It's saying that because of murder, the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed and the Shechina left. Asked of Huberman, the first Beis Hamikdash was destroyed because of all three: Avodah Zarah, Gilui Arayos, and Shvichas Damim. Madua Amru Kan v'Masechta Shabbos Avodah Shvichas Damim. Why did it also say Gilui Arayos and Avodah Zarah? No. In Masechta Shabbos it says that murder destroyed the temple, and Gilui Arayos and Shvich and Avodah Zarah, Galus came to the world. It's a stira. You ever notice that stira? The Gemara in Yuma says that the Avodah Zarah, Gilui Arayos, and Shvichas Damim destroyed the temple, and the Gemara in Shabbos says no, murder destroyed the temple, Gilui Arayos and Avodah Zarah caused the Galus. Achein. However, says of Huberman, la'olam lo'idami ma'ashachar v'hamikdash ba'avon gilui arayos avodas kacham l'ma'ashachar ba'avon shvichas damim. What Avodah Zarah and Gilui Arayos did is fundamentally unsimilar to the repercussion of murder. The shvichas damim, murder that takes the soul out of another human. Think about it. What is murder doing? It's taking the soul that was residing in man, like the Spirit of God resides in the temple, and murder literally is destroying the temple of man. So murder is the direct cause of destruction of the temple, as the Maharal says. Man and a temple are equal. And the murder of a human being is removing the soul from its resting place in the guf. So murder directly destroys the temple. And it's not needed the other sins of Gilui Arayos and Avodah Zarah, because it takes the soul, and is machriv Adam, and the churban of Adam is the churban Beis Hamikdash, like the Maharal said, Elu shnei dvarim shkulim. But Gilui Arayos and Avodah Zarah do something else. They don't take out the soul and destroy the temple of man. What they do is it contaminates the soul. Rak metamim chelkei hanefesh biyachad im shvichas damim. They all together join together to contaminate man's soul. V'chulam mishtatvim b'hakah shemachrivas hamikdash, and they all contaminate the soul. Therefore, the Tana says murder destroyed the mikdash. By Avodah Zarah and Gilui Arayos, that caused their exile, and instead others come and take their place. And says Rav Huberman, I later saw that the Maharal in his Chidushei Haggadahs on Shabbos, he says a similar idea, and thank the Lord that He guided me in the path of truth. In other words, murder is a most direct cause of the Churban, since a man with a soul resting in him is the perfect parallel of the Mikdash. Therefore, murder is the most direct cause. It's Avodah Zarah and Gilui Arayos that contribute to the contamination of man's nefesh, and that contributes, together with all these sins, to exile. Okay, Rabbi said this is the second offering for today, the great subject of Shkula, Misas, Tzadikim, Kesreifas, Beis Elokeinu, and this year, let us commemorate the loss of many great Gedolei Yisrael, and especially one of the great Gedolim of the United States of America, the leader Mayetzes Gedolei Torah, the Novominsker Rebbe, who we lost during this epidemic. And in our minds, we should think of Shkula, Misas, Tzadikim, Kesreifas, Beis Elokeinu.
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.